Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court, other court issues, as well as CPS. I am your host, Maryann Petri, and today I have a return guest. I have Attorney Connie Reguli from Tennessee. The last time she was on my show was June 13th. Season 3, Episode 63. Attorney Reguli has been an attorney for 27 years. She's a mother of 3 adopted children and knows firsthand how challenging the family court can be, both legally and emotionally. Using her personal and professional experience to guide clients through their case, Attorney Reguli cares about what's happening to these families and the children inside these courtrooms, and now she's paying the price. Today, we're going to focus on how her case has morphed into this social media presence being the threat to the establishment, the judiciary, and now it's totally taken over everything. So I welcome you to the show, Attorney Reguli. How are you?
Oh, Maryann, thank you. And thank you for having me back. So when I was on the show before, I had already been through a jury trial, and we spoke quite a bit about that, about the judge had changed the language of the statute for custodial interference, removing some of the language, saying it was not an essential element. I know it was probably a little bit complicated for some people who are not lawyers, but hopefully they can maybe listen to it again and understand that if they need to. But since then, we have had a sentencing hearing. And so the sentencing hearing really morphed into a criticism of public expression on social media to the events that have occurred in my case with Ms. Hancock. And this is, I mean, it's like a good thing, bad thing all at once. And I'm excited to be able to discuss that with you.
Oh, definitely. I can't imagine what you have been through in the past couple days. You know, when you were in there, did you have a court stenographer or a videographer at all? Anything?
Yeah, well, yeah, thank you. So it is a criminal case. So in Tennessee, every criminal case must have a court reporter present because there must be a record made on all criminal matters. So there is a court reporter there. Now, this was in what's called the historic courtroom in Franklin, which is an old courthouse. The acoustics are horrible, which they could improve if they worked on it. Sometimes I think they don't want to improve the acoustics because the courtroom was full. I mean, you would have thought I would have murdered somebody, but I had about maybe 12 people there or so. I had some clients show up to testify in my behalf, but then we also had we had the DA who was prosecuting, who is Mary Catherine Evans in Williamson County, and she is basically an employee of that DA's office, but the actual DA, the one who is elected, the district attorney, Kim Helper, remained in the courtroom the entire time. We also had the DCS attorney, Tracy Hetzel, stayed in the courtroom the entire time, and the DCS attorney, Sophia Crawford, who is one of the, I don't know what her exact title is, but she's basically second in charge of the legal department at central office under Doug Diamond. So she has sat through Miss Hancock's entire jury, my entire jury trial, and my entire sentencing. And then Judge Joseph Woodruff, the judge who recused himself in my case, walked into the back of the courtroom and sat directly in front of the judge who was ruling on this case within that straight eyesight, and sat in the back of the courtroom the entire time of the sentencing hearing. I know when I was testifying, I just looked straight at him. I just couldn't believe he had made his way back into the courtroom yet again.
That's creepy. I find it also creepy that your judge was whispering the whole time. I think that's very creepy.
Well, so so the way that courtroom is set up, you can't hear unless people speak up and they put their microphones in front of their mouth. And so, the witnesses were always, they kept telling the witnesses, make sure they had their microphone up. And we did have Tracy Hetzel testify, which I'll talk about in a second. We had the detective testify, which I'll talk about. And then I testified as well. And then I had some witnesses, and they always wanted to make sure that microphone was close to their mouth. But the judge was not close enough to the microphone that the people who were sitting in the galley, which is those behind the bar in the courtroom, behind the barrier, we have a barrier in the courtroom. So those behind the barrier, those in the galley, really could not hear what he was saying. And somebody asked him to speak up, and he was not happy that somebody made that request.
So one of the pit boys asked him to speak up?
Well, yeah, yes. Actually, a reporter who was there asked him to speak up, and he, it was a little disruptive, but honestly, it is an open public court proceeding, and I don't know how to do that. I don't know a way for anybody to make sure that they can be heard in the back of the room, and they should be heard in the back of the room.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, I had some great clients come in and talk about how I had saved their families and how I wasn't afraid. I would stand up against the state bureaucracy. There are so many taxpayer dollars that have been expended on this. And in fact, near the end of the sentencing hearing, the district attorney, Mary Catherine Evans, made this comment about how much taxpayer dollars I had cost the state and the citizens. And yet you had all of these people like voluntarily showing up. And for the people who haven't seen our first episode together a couple weeks ago, I'll bring us back to this point that this whole thing started because DCS started an investigation. I made a phone call. I said, please call me back. We will cooperate with you. We will do a welfare check. And nobody would call me back. All it would have taken is a phone call. And instead of that, they prepared a petition. They lied in the petition. Deandra Miller lied in the petition. She said that the mother had failed to cooperate, which was a flat lie because she knew I had called her and her supervisor. And I'm sure that was very influential on a judge who thought that there was a parent who would not cooperate with DCS, and he signed an ex parte order, a judge in another county, which was totally outside of the jurisdiction of the court in which the mother would have been the proper jurisdiction. So they did it intentionally. They did it behind our back. And then, and that would have solved everything. That would have been the end of the day. And instead, they pushed us. And my concern was always about her young daughter, and who had never been away from her mom, and who has now been severely traumatized by this experience. And they just don't get it. They just don't get it. And and if you read the story that the Tennessee Tribune did, it's literally legalism. Legalism. For biblical people, they understand the legalism of the Old Testament, where, the rules that they make are more important than really the effect on the population. And that's what this is about. This is not about the well-being of a child or the best interest or the safety of a child ever. This is about the legalism of creating a document, a piece of paper now. A piece of paper. This is not a law created by the General Assembly. This is creating a piece of paper with a signature on it that compels people to act in a certain manner without due process.
So they are essentially making up the laws as they go along.
Well, yeah. In this case, they changed they went to another county to get an ex parte order. And even then, still, it was not custodial interference because the judge took the language out of the law that would have required them to produce an order of visitation, which is all custodial interference is about. And think about it. People are like, I'm sure there's a few people out there and they don't understand this whole thing like I do. And so, maybe there's this thought in their mind that, you got to take care of safety of a child is so important. You know what? If DCS or the police believe that a child is being neglected or abused, the criminal code in Tennessee for neglect is so broad, they could have gotten a criminal warrant for neglect of a child and arrested that mother for neglect of that child on that day, and they did not do it. They did not do it. And, the mother was never charged criminally with any type of neglect of that child. And then they ended up dismissing the case. So for people who out there who want to take a moment of thought and think that, well, maybe I did something that didn't protect a child, then they don't understand the law, and they need to understand that you always have the ability to take a criminal warrant on a parent. The other thing they got upset with me about is that I said, I don't think you should listen to Amber Alerts anymore, because and that's not a law. An Amber Alert is not a law. An Amber Alert is not a court order. It's just a news flash. And you know how they get an Amber Alert? It's really quite frightening. They take a piece of paper. Okay, it's a piece of paper. This has got some writing on it, but it's a form that they fill out. It's got about 12 blanks on it, and they just put on this form that here's the name of the child. They attach a picture to it, and they just put that this child is endangered, or this child is with a non-custodial parent, which is what they say like 80% of the time. The child was last seen with a non-custodial parent. Right, parent being the key word there, right? And so they're like, Miss Reguli told people on Facebook to ignore Amber Alerts. I have a right to do that, right? Because I've seen them, I watch them over and over, especially Tennessee. So they take this one sheet of paper, they fill out these little blanks, and they fax it to the TBI. And that's how they get an Amber Alert. They don't have to do a sworn statement. They don't have to have evidence. They don't have to have anything but a name and a picture.
Doesn't that coincide with the red flag thing they're trying to push?
Well, yeah, it kind of does, because we don't even know the extent of that law, where that's going to go yet. But yeah, it's basically an adjudication, right? It's an adjudication. So, for the legally lame, I'll call them, God bless America, I love you all. But for those who don't understand that terminology, adjudication means what the judge says. It's what the judge says. Right? And so just like in my criminal case, there are all kinds of things they didn't allow the jury to even hear. They didn't allow the jury to hear that it would be an invalid order if a judge did not have subject matter jurisdiction. They didn't allow the jury to hear the real custodial interference law. So I couldn't even testify. I couldn't even bring to the jury's attention that the judge changed the law 3 years after the fact. Okay, I couldn't even say that. Right? And so the jury had no choice but to make a guilty finding, because and the other part was what I was charged with was accessory after the fact. Accessory after the fact, meaning that I knew that a felony was committed. Well, I couldn't have known that a felony is committed if you changed the law and made a new felony. And secondly, it clearly says in the statute it does not apply to legal representation. The jury did not even get to hear that part of the law. That part of the law was stricken out and removed, and the judge did not allow it. That accessory after the fact does not apply to legal representation. They had no choice, right? And that's, even the grand jury, it's like the grand jury had this indictment and had this language in an indictment that the district attorney, Kim Helper, who's responsible for preparing those indictments, she took out half of the language of the law when she sent the indictment to the grand jury. So, ultimately, this is all about shutting me up. They've drug it out. This was 2018. Here we are now, 2022. So they've kept me under this threat and this umbrella. And of course, it'll take another year to do an appeal, right? And when they got the fake felony on me, they were able to summarily take my license away from me that I've had for 28 years. And I left, maybe 30 families stranded of not having an attorney to help them get their children out of DCS. They love this. DCS is having a fig party, I'm sure. They probably got balloons and champagne, and, they probably got a big picture of me with a red circle with an X through it, and like, we got rid of her. We shut her up. I'm like, yeah, well, this party is not over yet.
No. Not at all. In the fact that what they did to you is similar to what they did to me. I mean, here you are, a valuable member of society, helping families get their kids back from these corrupt institutions. And here I was a registered nurse for 23 years, and they took me out of the ER. And I'm sorry, but a seasoned nurse, okay, when you come into the ER, good luck when you get a student nurse. Y- I mean, this is like absolute stupidity. And
It's
that
crazy.
is a waste. Yes, and it's a waste of taxpayer dollars.
Well, and it's crazy that a judge could do that, right?
Mm,
It's crazy that
mhm.
because there's no finding, right? There was no finding, like in your case that you hurt somebody, right? Or that so that's like with me. They're like, oh, she disobeyed a court order. I'm like, okay, well, this could have been and even the judge, I'm going to say this at the end of it, the judge made a comment. He's like, this could have been a contempt of court action, which it should have been, because in a contempt of court action, I would have been able to directly challenge the validity of the order, because that is clearly under Tennessee law one of the essential elements of criminal contempt is the validity of the order. So you can challenge the underlying order, and then you can challenge the ambiguity of the order. And this is why they did not go with criminal contempt, because it would have to be back in the court jurisdiction of where the order was entered, which they couldn't do because that judge had recused himself, right? And he was out of county, so they didn't have that judge. And so I would have been able to directly challenge his jurisdiction at the date and time that he entered that order. They didn't want me to be able to do that. I would have been able to challenge the ambiguity of the order, of who was required to do what under the language of the order, because that became part of it as well. I was like, she was not required to deliver her child anywhere, which I am now sure they will change their orders and force that as to be part of their orders. But it just said that the child was placed in the custody of DCS. So I said, I was just going to make some phone calls and get her a hearing on that, because they had denied her a hearing. They'd gotten an ex parte order, set an ex parte hearing the following morning, didn't call me, didn't have any sense to call me. This is government out of control. I am going to be perfectly clear about that. This is government out of control. So let's go back to the hearing for a little bit, because I want to talk about a couple of things that happened. So this is so typically when you have a criminal case, and I was a prosecutor myself at the very beginning of my legal career, so I'm familiar with preparing felonies, having jury trials, having sentencing hearings. Okay, I've done that personally. And so typically at a sentencing hearing, what you have is what's called a victim impact statement, right? So if you have a robbery or a murder or theft, then the victims of the crime can get up and say how they were impacted to influence the judge on what kind of sentence somebody should have. Well, here's the problem. They didn't have a victim, right? They don't have a victim. Who's the victim here? Who is the victim? They don't have the state is the victim. I mean, so what they did was they put up the DCS attorney, and she whined and cried about how we had filed a federal lawsuit against her, and how upset and nervous she was about that, and how distressed she was over that federal lawsuit.
Oh, poor thing.
Yeah. Now, and keep in mind, she didn't have to pay for an attorney. Okay. The state defended her. So, that was their victim. That was the victim impact statement, was Tracy Hetzel. So then they still didn't get very far with that. And so they tried to impugn me because I've been aggressive for 12 years, and I've been a target of retaliation, and they have tried to get rid of me because I've called them out. I've been at the state legislature. I've tried to get laws changed. I've tried to tell them how unaccountable the judiciary is. They don't like me, so they just use all of that bureaucracy to come after me over and over and over and over again, right? And so, we just battle it out. My ability to practice law has never been interrupted. However, they did put me on probation for a year, and it was really over a contract dispute between me and a client. It should have been a civil matter. They turned it into an ethical matter. It's like, whatever. Like I said, I went through it. I battled it out. they didn't interrupt my ability to practice, but that's all they've really got, is that this 1 year that there was this supervised probationary period, which really ended up only being 3 months of supervision. So that's all they got, right? And so, but you know, the more recent thing is that these judges have filed complaints, and the judges filed complaints because I've called them out on what they've done, how they've not followed law, how they've not followed procedure, how they have interfered and interrupted with personal rights. So they didn't really have. So they put Tracy Hetzel on. They try to make her this victim, their victim impact statement. They don't really get very far with that. And then they put the detective on. So Detective Lori Russ works with the Brentwood Police Department. She is the one. She is the she's kind of the keystone here. She's the one who got this to be this huge investigation. She had just not too long before that become a detective. She'd been a police officer before. And so she's the one who really allowed, and Tracy Hetzel made the first police report. And then Detective Russ was the one who started this huge investigation. Now, keep in mind, again, there are no big secrets here. They knew I was her attorney. They knew. They came to my house with cops, right, and picked her up. Nobody resisted to that, carried off the child. Nobody, there's no big secrets here, right? So, but this detective launched into an investigation suiting of a murder, right? She subpoenaed my phone record. She subpoenaed my GPS locator on my phone to show exactly where I drove my car down the highway. She subpoenaed my Facebook. And we're going to talk about that again in a minute. She did a search warrant. I'm sorry, not a subpoena, a search warrant, because there's a difference. Because a subpoena, people generally get notice of a subpoena. You never get notice of a search warrant. So, and this is a huge problem in the country, especially with Facebook. And so they did a search warrant for my Facebook. And so Lori Russ gets up there at the sentencing hearing, and she talks about how she subpoenaed my Facebook because of the things I was saying, right? So that right there is a problem. It's a First Amendment problem, and it's a Fourth Amendment problem. First Amendment is your right to free speech, and then free speech retaliation, First Amendment retaliation, and a Fourth Amendment problem because a search warrant has to be limited in scope to the probable cause. Now, guess who signed that search warrant? The judge who signed that search warrant is the same judge who rewrote the law to be able to prosecute me. So, yeah. Yeah.
That's disgusting. That is a perversion of the law. And this can happen to anyone.
Yes, it can. Yes, it can. Now I'm going to tell you what the judge said. So here's what Judge Acree said. He said, one of the comments he made was, sometimes one might even engage in civil disobedience to further that cause and bring public awareness to the issue. However, when one engages in such behavior, that person should be prepared to suffer the consequences. Okay, now here's the problem with that is I have maintained my innocence, and I continue to do so because of the changing of the law. This was not about civil disobedience. This was about me applying my legal knowledge that I had acquired over the 25 years prior about general sessions jurisdiction, subject matter jurisdiction. And so it really was, I reached out to the organization and the agency to cooperate with them. It wasn't even about civil disobedience at the time. After I started finding out what they were doing and reporting to them, I don't know. I mean, civil disobedience is a violation of an order. This is not civil disobedience. This is applying your legal knowledge. And then down here, he says, so that when I testified on the stand, and I testified about my concerns about the child, what would happen, which proved out to be true once she was removed, they shut all of that up too. They didn't want to hear any of that. And he, the attorney asked in retrospect if I would have done something different. And, I thought about it, and I have to think to myself, they want this remorse. They want you to admit you were wrong, and you haven't even had your appeal yet, right? I mean, I've held out that there are substantial legal issues with this entire case. And that's what I continue to believe, right? And so if the Court of Criminal Appeals say no, a judge can change the law 3 years after the fact, then we have a different position. But when we put together the motion for the post-trial motion, I mean, there's United States Supreme Court cases that say that a judge cannot rewrite the law. He can't rewrite the law ex post facto. I mean, it's in our Constitution, in our state and national Constitution, federal Constitution, that the legislature cannot create ex post facto laws, right? They can't create a law and then apply it back 4 years earlier. And judges can't either. Judges can't rewrite the law. So I have maintained that the entire time. Now, this judge shifting created some problems because the judge who rewrote the law jumped out of the case, recused himself, and they brought in another judge at the last minute. And I'm just not convinced that he had read through all of those memorandums that had previously been filed with the court, because he would have understood that I had always maintained my innocence and I'd always maintained the same legal position. When this judge has had some experience with me before, I had him in another case where I took his decision all the way to the Tennessee Supreme Court and had him reversed because I got the clarity in the law established for judicial estoppel. So he knows I'm not stupid. Right? He knows that personally because he had that experience not that long ago with me challenging his interpretation of the law. So it's upsetting that you would expect somebody to be remorseful and say they would have done something different if they have maintained that what you are accusing them of was not a crime in the first place. It's so crazy.
I think he just also wanted to make an example out of you because you're a woman.
Well, that's very interesting. Woo, that's very interesting.
The reason why I was thinking of this because, when Martha Stewart and the stock thing happened, even my mother said, hey, if this was a guy, this wouldn't be happening. No guy would be going to prison over this, but they're making an example out of her because she's a woman.
Wow, interesting. Well, I am a Northern girl. I do say I'm a Northern girl. I was born and raised in Indiana and was raised by a single mom who ended up being a very successful businesswoman. Ultimately, she struggled through being single as she was trying to raise 3 kids, but she ended up in Nashville. I came here with her to open this restaurant. It became a very successful restaurant, opened in 1978 for 30 years. And when I first came down here with her and we were trying to get the business going and we met with some bankers, I told her it was just a big old hick town, but it is the South. And there are parts of the South that I have seen under the strappings of having a, I don't know if I want to use a word so strong as bias, but having a negative perception of women and the way they handle situations, especially women from the North, because I say this, and I have some Southern women friends, I love them to death, but I jokingly say that they, face a problem by saying, oh, I'm so sorry. I just did not understand that was the way that you had heard that, right? I mean, it's like, and I know an attorney who speaks exactly like that, but, I'm a Northern girl, and I'm the girl of a mom who ended up being successful through her struggles and never quit. And I went into law, honestly, just really thinking to myself, I'm smart and I'm strong. That's it, right?
Hmm.
I'm smart and I'm strong. So I can take on an issue, I can take on a conflict, and I can help organize it. I can help define it, right? And I really expected the court system to be much better than it is. And, I went to school late in life. I had worked at the restaurant with my mom, and 1994 was the first year I was ever out practicing, and started as a district attorney. And, once I got into private practice, it was not long at all before I found that there's a lot of crazy stuff going on. And I say I never hated lawyers so much until I became one. But the profession has a lot of tragedy to it because
Hmm.
of the way things and situations are handled. But this is really like the peak. I mean, this is like, okay, we have just like really peaked out here, that
Hmm.
you're going to take an attorney with who at the time was, well into 25 years, had worked all over the state, and at least a third of the counties, had been in cities, small towns, had stood up, had fought, had prevailed a lot, had done appeals. I also have 2 Sixth Circuit opinions that are pretty strong opinions that protect rights of families and persons. I mean, attorneys go through their whole career and never get that kind of a decision, right? I had a couple decisions come from the Tennessee Supreme Court. So, attorneys just, that never happens. I mean, a lot of attorneys just kind of go through the grill, right? So it was, so what they have done to me is deliberate, to eliminate me from the mix, and to discredit me. And so, I've spoken to many legislators, I've spoken to governors, I've spoken to Congress people, and they want to discredit me so that those people will not listen to me. And, they are not going to prevail on that, because that's even more important than not being able to step into a courtroom, because our courtrooms have become so bad and so biased and so inefficient, and just so costly to families from all extremes, that, it really, I just don't even see how it can be maintained much longer.
Hmm. Hmm. And also to make an example out of you so other lawyers will be afraid to walk in your footsteps.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. They do not want to, yeah, they want to shut them up. And, and that's what, if you look at, we didn't talk about this, but I know in our other broadcasts we talked about the Family Forward Project, which is my main social media presence on Facebook. It is just a loose organization of people with a similar interest, which is child welfare reform. Lots of families on there, some other, professionals, semi-professionals, even some, political people, etc. Some people watch it, but it is a public group. So some people look and see what's going on, but they're afraid to join it because they're afraid, they'll be targeted as well. But, it's really where I have encouraged people to have a voice and to speak out. And, I do lives there. I talk to people all the time. And so, anybody who's listening, who has any interest in just how do we unwind this huge, huge mess, they should become engaged there. So, I have a little bit of I do have a YouTube channel. We post quite a few videos there. I have a little bit of a presence on Instagram and Truth Social. I don't really use them as much. Posting on social media can be a full-time job. So
Right. I know.
in and of itself. So, so I have to kind of pick and choose, but people do need to, pay attention as to what's going on, because this is really where we're being hurt as Americans on a day-to-day basis. I mean,
Mhm.
I mean, it's, people are being crushed by a system. And I'm going to tell you, the courtrooms, they don't care about you as a
Mm-mm.
person. They don't care. And they don't care about your kids, really. I mean, in this case, nobody cared about this child. Nobody. Nobody cared about this child. This child was put 200 miles from her home. She had never been separated from her mom. The very first phone call the mom recorded, and I have a recording of that, and she is bawling her eyes out. She was put in 10 months. She was in 6 homes and 4 schools. Over spring break, they even dropped her off at the bus driver's house to spend a few days because the foster parent wanted a break and didn't even tell us until after the fact. I mean, what they do, they tore out pages of her diary before they returned her to her mom. Yes, ma'am. They did an HPV vaccine on her without notice or permission. And, you know, it's crazy what they do. And nobody cares about that. Nobody cares about that. And I care about that. And I care about the way that, you know, DCS is monetizing children in Tennessee and all across the country.
It's all been, you know, kids for cash scheme for, you know, so many years, and it's destroying our future generations. Because once these kids have been in foster care and then they go out and have kids of their own, then CPS is going to be coming after them to take their kids.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They're disgusting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And here's something else the judge said. He said, I commented earlier in this proceeding that your rights are protected by the First Amendment. You can say about anything you want to these days. However, after being convicted in this case, you continue to state how wrong the courts were, or how wrong DCS was, and how wrong the officers were. And you're basically saying that you have no remorse for what you did. And you're saying, in essence, in public, it's all right to disobey a court order if you disagree with that order, and that's simply not an option. Okay, so where did this come from? This came from the detective who said, you know, even after her conviction, she's continued to be on social media. They didn't play a social media tape. She didn't give a single date. She didn't have any transcription. She didn't even say exactly what was said. So this was just like this whole fabricated thing. Nobody had any proof that I told anybody to disobey a court order, nor do they have any proof that I have ever disobeyed a court order, past or present, right? Just this order that I still continue to claim is invalid. And then he's saying, you know, you have no remorse, which again, I'm saying I've held out that I am correct, and we will let the Tennessee Court of Appeals play that out, and maybe even the Tennessee Supreme Court. And yeah, I continue to state how wrong the court is. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I can't wait for the day that the courts have to rule on ex post facto judicial determinations, rewriting the law 3 years after the fact. I want to see where they go with that and see if they are going to either agree with the United States Supreme Court and say a judge cannot do that, or if they are going to deny the whole United States Supreme Court decision on it. And then he said, and how wrong the officers were. Yep, yep, I have said that too. And how wrong DCS was. Yep, I'm saying that. I mean, I am saying that. And so he punished me. He punished me for maintaining my innocence publicly. They had no proof that I told anybody to disobey a court order. But they're punishing me because I publicly maintain my innocence after the trial that we had. Now, and I may have had a couple live videos on that. I don't even know. I had other things to talk about, like the election. They did this to take me off the ballot and to keep me from running for judge against Judge Sharon Guffey, which is a whole nother discussion about why they needed to maintain her on the ballot and not me.
Collusion. I'm sure.
Well, and I mean, the judge that changed the law, Judge Woodruff, had donated to the campaign of Judge Sharon Guffey. And in a previous election, they had signed each other's petitions. He, was invited to her election kickoff. I don't have any pictures of that kickoff because they didn't post any pictures because they knew I was watching to see who was going to show up at her re-election campaign issues. But he did show up at the Williamson County commissioner debate, and made sure that people knew there that I had been convicted of a felony and they should not vote for me. So he was actively campaigning for her. And, and then his son, his son, oh, this is great. So after the conviction, his son was posting on social media. His son, the judge's son, was posting on social media, yeah, about my conviction and about that I was going to have sanctions and about the disciplinary action. Yeah, his son, Wade Woodruff. That's Wade Woodruff. Yeah, they all have names, right? And
Mm-hmm.
they're, half of these are elected officials or they've spoken out publicly, and they have a name.
I definitely would not name a child Wade. Sorry.
Yeah, that's a real Southern thing. Okay, then he also made this other comment. Miss Reguli, an attorney, violated a court order. She advised her client to do so. She went on social media telling people that's all right. Again, there's no proof of that.
Mm-hmm.
There's no proof of that. So, and then he says those facts also, wait a minute, okay, so I can't read that part. The court thinks, wait a minute. I'm concerned that if Ms. Reguli walks away completely without this kind of punishment, mean incarceration, and only probation, that others will do the same thing. Really? Really? So again, there's no evidence that I told people to go violate a court order. Now, many times I've said ex parte orders are a problem. They should be outlawed. They should not be allowed to go get ex parte orders on hearsay. And if there is an allegation that's serious enough, they can go get a warrant. Because all you need is probable cause on a warrant, and you can go pick somebody up for child abuse or neglect.
It's so hard to see you go through this rigmarole that you don't need to be going through when you could be helping families.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and and it's not just helping families at this point, but it's also really educating the public and talking to legislators about the laws, about budgets, about the, like in Tennessee in December 2020, the Department of Children's Services had a horrible audit. They had a horrible audit. I mean, they did surveys of employees across the state. It was horrible. Tennessee ranks on what do they call it? Child well-being score, which is issued by the Administration of Children and Families. Tennessee scores like 39, right? There's another score on that. There was a recent report that came out about foster care stability. Tennessee was the worst state in the country for foster care stability, showing that foster children in Tennessee had an average of 3 or more placements each year. So, it's not like we have a stellar organization here who is being the person who is using the federal tax dollars that we pay in a very efficient and astute and public interest manner. They are wasting money. They are driven to get numbers so they can get more kids, so they can put more kids in foster care, tie people up in the system. Put the pressure on their lives is incredible. And that the pressure on your life and being tied up in a system is just breathtaking.
Yeah, it's just, I would really like to see those systems abolished. I hope I get to see that in my lifetime.
It's crazy. It's crazy. We have much to do. I am, of course, going to appeal. And Wendy's case, who had her trial last summer. Now, I'll also say my trial was supposed to be in September. We were all psyched up to go. We were ready to go. On Sunday, my attorney says the DA is sick and can't do it. I found that a little bit suspicious, honestly. And then they continued the trial and put it right in the middle of early voting, which meant that was tied up. I could not go out and campaign. And of course, they could get their conviction because they had had screwed the case up so bad, right? Had the trial been in September, we would have already been well into the appellate process. And so, there was some manipulation of time here, I think, all along the way. It's just like the original part of this. I mean, it happened in 2018. They didn't even go to the grand jury until July of 2019. After the entire case was dismissed, the children were returned to their mother. There was no criminal charges for her abusing or neglecting children. They had accused her of abusing drugs. They did a nail bed test and it came out clean. I had her do a psych eval test early and they refused to accept it. And then they forced her to go get another psych eval. They refused to give me a copy of it. They refused to give me a copy of the children's psych evals. And then when I was getting ready to go to court to push that they turn those things over to me is when they dismissed the case. But, $50,000 later. I mean, the sad thing is I got to the point where people would call me about getting their kids out of DCS custody. And I'd say, it's $50,000. It doesn't have to be that way. But it's not unusual for parents to have to put that much money into it. And a lot of families just don't have that.
That is so sad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For a racket, it's all a racket, extortion.
Well, it's not justice, it is not justice.
Not
and
at
it's
all.
not, and it's lost its whole, protection of children. It's lost that as well. So, we, and people are struggling to write laws and to find better laws. And, unfortunately, and, I'm all about working with the General Assembly and trying to help our laws be better. But here's the problem. Almost like 90% of those laws that they enact require a judge to make a decision, right? And so if they write a law and then they always, about, even equal parenting, I mean, Tennessee now has I think it's substantially equal time, clause, right? And yet in that, even in that, they stick in, unless a judge determines it's against the best interest of the child, right? Mm-hmm. So, the standards are so foggy and they all rely on a judge, and judges are subjective. I don't care what you say, they're subjective. Mm-hmm. And it matters whether or not they have children. It matters whether or not they're married or not married, or, had a bad divorce, or, they're just tired and they really can't even listen to people anymore. It matters what their personal interest and appetites are, because, there's a judge in Tennessee that, he was trading custody decisions for sex with mamas, right? Mm-hmm. So, there's too many factors here that are subjective and also depend on money, right? Because every time the legislature writes a law that requires somebody to go to court to get relief, they are taxing you, right? They are taxing you because you have to pay for court costs and attorney's fees to get a decision on that law. Mm-hmm. So it's like an unseen tax, right? There's no way to resolve that without spending $10, $20, $30, $40, $50,000.
What a mess. I'm sorry you're going through this. You don't deserve this at all.
Well, it's part of the process, I guess. I'm just, I will tell you, Maryann, I've been in the trenches for 28 years when they stripped my license away from me, raised children, worked, bought a home. I mean, was a productive citizen all along, never had any trouble. But I'm telling you, I worked 50, 60 hours a week, many, 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 many times. Many times I would spend my weekends writing briefs. I've had vacations planned with my families. I've had to cancel at the last minute because a judge ordered me to appear in court on a case, or a client called me in a desperate situation. I have not been able to do things with my kids while they were growing up, and I raised my kids as a single mom. I mean, it put a lot of stress and a lot of pressure on my personal life. And I always got up and did the next best thing for a client as long as I could do so. So I'm going to say I have slept in a few mornings. You know,
Yeah.
I did take a vacation with my family last week, right? So,
Mhm.
you know, I'm going to have to regroup and, do, I am still going to work, whether that ends up, being some, mediation or consulting. I have all my master's coursework in psychology and could probably finish up and get that degree fairly quickly with one of the local colleges or universities. And I think I have some pretty interesting projects that I would like to see them engage in. So, we'll see what that ends up looking like at the end of the day. They've
Mhm.
kept me in such chaos. It's going to take me, probably another couple months to really get that going. But, I've just
Mhm.
reorganized my life and, cut back some expenses. And I am almost 70 years old. So, I can act like a almost retired person. It's
Mhm.
okay. So, my kids are kind of glad about that. My grandkids are very
Mhm.
excited about that, actually.
Aw, aw, that's cute. But they're happy to have their grandma back. But you don't look your age. You don't look your age.
Oh, thank
Oh my
you.
God.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. But yep, I am. I will be 70 in July. So it,
I bet that judge ruled that way because you remind him of some girl that dumped him before prom. I'm sure that's what it is.
oh, yeah. Well, and sometimes I have to think to myself, and this is on the lighter side, and I'm sure somebody will pull this out and use this against me. But, on the lighter side, sometimes I wonder, like, do they not have the balls to do what I did? Right? Do they not
Right.
have the balls to stand up against the bureaucracy that has
Mhm.
gotten so far out of control? They would rather be in they want to be in the passenger seat instead of the driver's seat. And this is how this all got started with me down here in this community is, I sent another attorney a letter and I said, this judge is just violating the constitutional rights of my client, right? And he took that letter and he waved it in front of the judge, and the judge was very upset about that. And then, he tried to go after me. So, the manner in which they operate is
Mm.
shocking, just shocking. So, um, we have, we have much to do. This story is not
Mhm.
over
Mhm.
yet.
And you will be coming back on again,
Oh, yes, of course.
definitely. And how do you want people to reach you if they have any questions?
Okay, so I do want people to know. So the Family Forward Project on Facebook and in the Messenger on Facebook, I'm Connie Reguli, easy to find. You can message me through there. I do want people to look if they've had any involvement with CPS. One of the things that we are doing is the Family Forward Foundation, which is a nonprofit, is now kind of partnering with the Tennessee Tribune to collect data. I have created a very extensive survey form. And maybe once you post this, somehow we can get a link in there as well.
Mhm.
But it is, and it's fairly easy. I've done one before where it required people to put a lot of narrative in. I really am just looking for the themes of the things that they do repeatedly. And so they have check boxes like, did your social worker do any of these things? And it
Mhm.
can be, come in your home without consent, talk to your child without consent, lie under oath in a petition, lie under oath in court, so that when I create the spreadsheet on this, I can show these themes. And so because the Tennessee Tribune has done probably 25 articles now, really spreading the word on this whole crisis that we're in. And so they can reach me those two ways. I do have I had a judicial page. I have changed it to Connie Reguli Family Advocacy. And, that is another avenue, but really Messenger on Facebook is one of the best ways. And I have a Facebook profile. I do a lot of lives on there as well. So those are the best. I will give you an email address at connie.familyforward@gmail.com. connie.familyforward@gmail.com is also an email account that I use. So I really want people, if they've had any involvement, to get our survey form done. I've just put it out. I've already got about 45 people who have responded, and we really want about 300 or 400 people. So,
And this is only for the state of Tennessee.
actually, I want you, if you're in any state, because it asks you what state you're in. Right now, Florida, a class action lawsuit was filed in Florida within the past week or so. I think it was on the 20th. No, it was probably at the 20th, June 20th. I have spoken to one of the attorneys who is doing that class action, and basically it is saying that the state agency is shoving kids into foster care as opposed to doing relative placements or friend placements and trying to keep the family more stabilized. So this type of information will also be helpful for them as they develop that lawsuit in Florida. Texas had a class action lawsuit that has been pending quite a while now. It's a little bit more directed towards foster children, but I think once we kind of get a hold of this data, we will be able to get these class action lawsuits kind of rolling in different areas, different places, and continue to move forward.
I'll be happy to contribute.
Okay, good. Yes.
Yes. Well, hey, don't jump off, because I'm still going to have you back on again when you're ready. So
Yes.
definitely. Slam the Gavel is a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in these family courtrooms. I'm your host, Maryann Petri, author of Dismantling Family Court Corruption, Why Taking the Kids Was Not Enough, and Cry Out for Justice, Poems of Truth. Please join us again here with Attorney Connie in the future and other exciting guests. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.